Hello, hello, everybody. Welcome. As you're coming in, maybe you want to start putting into the chat where you're from, so we know where you're dialing in from.
Hi.
Oh, welcome. Laura is with me now as well.
Hello all.
We already have a couple of people joining us here from Fort Wayne, London, Washington, Copenhagen. Yay. Hello from Canada.
Wow, all over the world.
Yay, amazing. Toronto, that's where I am right now. Nice to see you all. We're going to get started in just a few minutes. Let's give people a chance to all come in here and join us.
I'm excited for this one, Miriam. It's been a few weeks since we've been together.
I know, it's been a moment. Yeah, and just for everybody, you can always drop your chats, your questions in the chat throughout the entire session. And we will also have a Q&A in the end, though.
Yes, we sure will.
Okay. How are we doing? Yeah, great to see everyone.
I think I'll maybe give it another 1 to 2 minutes, see who else joins.
Yeah. Okay, I think maybe we can get started. Laura, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, definitely. Welcome everybody to today's strategy bootcamp. We are going to be talking about unveiling your strategy's blind spots. So let's introduce you to the presenters. So my name is Laura, Head of Strategy Execution at Cascade. I've been here for a few years, but my latest role is helping organizations to do strategy execution well. So excited to be here and take you through today's topic. If you missed at the beginning, we do have a little chat at the sidebar, so feel free to introduce yourself and what you're hoping to get out of today's session and where you're calling from. And yeah, we'll get into it. Over to you, Miriam.
Yeah, thank you so much, Laura. My name is Miriam, and I'm Strategy Execution Director here at Cascade. I've previously been heading up strategy for Adidas in Canada and had the opportunity to work for another couple of bigger global organizations and see strategy from creation all the way to execution. And I'm super passionate just about helping organizations as well to execute their strategy successfully. So let's dive into our topic and unveiling the blind spots of your strategy. So as we are talking about blind spots, I actually want to start with saying that blind spots are not always a bad thing. Blind spots sometimes can actually work out in your favor. So let's look at this example from Sarah Blakely, the famous founder from Spanx. When she first started out with her company, she did a bit of a show and tell at Neiman Marcus with her product. And we know that it was very well received, and she got into all the major retailers in North America. And a couple of years later, she was asked in an interview, so Sarah, how did you stand out and how did you get noticed at those trade shows? And her reaction was the quote that you see here on the slide deck. She didn't even know about trade shows. And thank God she did not, because the way what she did for her distribution strategy was exactly the right thing to do. So what is the what's the learning from this story, essentially, especially when we're looking at newer ventures or new projects that are set out there to do and to achieve? Sometimes if the vision is really strong, it's okay. It's obviously important to see what has to happen, but it's also sometimes okay to fail to see some things, like in the case for Sarah Blakely here. Of course, that is usually the minority of cases. When we're looking at blind spots, and specifically organizational blind spots from bigger organizations that are around maybe a little bit longer, we see that they can usually lead to some sort of failure. And in the case of the 3 organizations that you see here on the screen, they're no longer around in the way that they used to be. So just to pick on one example here with Blockbuster, we all kind of know the story, but they've been really a great retailer, probably best practice in many cases of what they did. But they missed one important point. They were missing and they were lacking to see consumer behavior at the time and how it was changing as their competitor Netflix was arising at the time. And they missed to see that the consumer ultimately will always go for whatever saves them time, the so-called timeonomics or the time value economics. The consumer goes for what saves them time. So we know that ultimately failing to see that put them out of business. So those are just a few examples, and I'm sure you know a couple more. But now let's see, what can we do about it? So we want to talk to you today about the 5 elements that could lead to your blind spots and what to do about it. So let's get started with the first one. The first element is a lack of focus. What does a lack of focus look like, you might ask? So it's a lack of clarity. It's usually some sort of chaos and some sort of conflicting priorities for the organization. And I've seen this many times in organizations where there is a lack of focus, and then even like a leadership team gets a little bit more into a tunnel vision. That means they are very focused on the short term and completely forget to really see that bigger vision and step out to have that broader view. So that's pretty dangerous, especially since it might lead to those blind spots and might actually lead to a failure in some sort. And any external factors, obviously, if you're failing to see those or failing to consistently check in of what's going on around innovations or new laws or whatever that might be around technological innovations, that can obviously also lead to blind spots. But what can we now do about it? Laura, what have you seen working successfully?
Yeah, I think lack of focus is one of those easy things to say that is causing failure in a business. But I think it's also one of probably the most common things that I hear that businesses really want help with, and typically why they come to an organization like Cascade. I think there's a few things. There's a few small tactical pieces that I can recommend you do tomorrow to drive an increase of focus. I think there's some bigger pieces at play. I think everybody's heard of a SWOT analysis, identifying the strengths, the weaknesses, the opportunities, and the threats. I think it's a very underrated tool, because what you can really do is take a step back from being in the weeds every day and being in sort of execution mode or delivering tactical projects, but really taking a step back and saying, what are our strengths right now and where are our weaknesses? What are the opportunities on the horizon that we maybe have missed because we've been very narrowly or, had tunnel vision on the remit that we're really focused on, but also the threats. I think it's one of those things that, particularly when you go out to your organization and get maybe a viewpoint of people on the shop floor, or people kind of, in front of customers, that they say, hey, they've been coming and asking for product X, which we no longer stock, or hey, they have mentioned this thing that they've seen online and we don't stock it in our store, or we don't offer that service. And so you can really get that insight from the people in the weeds, essentially, and that will allow you to then build a bit of an analysis, a bit of a step back, but really then anchor that and make sure that your strategy is actually hitting all of those points, if relevant. I think some other ways that I'm sure you've seen in your previous experience, Miriam, is like maybe some of the simpler things, like looking at your strategy on paper or in Excel or in Cascade, wherever it may live, and analyzing, is it too much? Are we really going to get all of this achieved? Or can we, at least for the next quarter or the next 2 quarters, really focus on the most critical, high priority initiatives and we come back to the other ones? Or can we really focus a couple of our teams around the corporate strategy or the group strategy that we've laid out? And so kind of making those like nuanced decisions to have a laser focus for a small period of time. We personally do this at Cascade. We're a tech business. So for us, we work in a very quarterly mindset anyway, but we set ourselves a challenge this year to only have 3 major objectives as leaders that we were going to commit to. And it really worked because it meant we could clear the noise and we could really commit for 1 quarter. And then the next quarter, we could continue committing or stop, start, continue. So I think picking those right mechanisms or tools. But I'd love to know more about maybe scenario planning at Adidas or any previous companies, or what would your recommendation be?
Yeah, first of all, I love SWOT analysis as well. It's so powerful, and especially if you let a couple of people do this around the leadership team, you'll get a really wholesome round of feedback. I definitely want to say that, and probably some things that you might not have thought about yourself. But yes, I've seen scenario planning being used very successfully as well, especially as you're planning ahead and you might have a growth plan for your business and you want to really just like analyze thoroughly like what is needed to be successful. And also what are any risks, or what are any, like, you want to plan a little bit for any uncertainty. I find scenario planning is an excellent tool to utilize, and just to make you think a little bit bigger than being just really like connected to this one plan that you put out there. So I've seen this, I've done this myself quite a bit, and I've seen organizations doing this very successfully, and really just help as well to get that, have that a little bit more flexible mindset. But at the same time, also it's an opportunity to push maybe for a little bit more, like, what if, like the way of thinking is really important here. Premortem analysis is another interesting and important one that just helps to get ahead of things as you're like thinking all the way to the end of your plan, like what could have failed. So it makes you think about things that you might not think about if you're just thinking very like essentially straightforward. So working backwards oftentimes is a really powerful tool to just help you think differently.
What are your thoughts, Miriam, on kind of there's a question around SWOT being meaningful in a rapidly changing world? And I think it's a really important call out, because I think the comment here is around COVID. I don't think that would show up in a SWOT analysis either. However, I think then we also need to rely on sort of who's conducting the SWOT analysis, or whose opinions are we bringing into the SWOT analysis. I think it's just one tool that you can have in your tool belt. I think we can't predict obviously too much in the future, but I think the more opinions or the more involvement from people that we have in it can also bring ideas that we may not have thought about as leaders potentially. But have you got any thoughts on that yourself?
Yeah, I would say it's always a combination of things. And of course, the SWOT analysis is powerful, but if any unplanned circumstances are happening, you can't foresee COVID, obviously, right? So that makes everyone pivot and operate in a different way. Either way, I think having tools like that ready and combine it maybe with some scenario planning is a good way to set yourself up for those more uncertain moments.
Yeah. And there's a comment as well around how you rank initiatives on what to focus on. But I know we're going to talk about prioritization frameworks a little bit later, so we should be able to answer that.
We'll definitely talk about that a little bit more. So maybe this is a good time to move on to our next element, misalignment. So what does misalignment look like? So misalignment is usually if there is a gap between strategy and operational execution. And I see this quite a bit with organizations where there is this kind of thinking between, oh, strategy just happens here in this vacuum, but then really the day-to-day is very different. Where the truth is, if you're doing strategy right, everybody in your organization should be connected to what your strategy is, and it should become part of your operations every day. So that's, if there is a gap, there's usually a misalignment, specifically because then individuals start to prioritize their own goals. If there is no connection back to what is being prioritized, to that point just now as well, individuals start going out and probably do what they think is right. And then, of course, inadequate resource allocation is also one of the symptoms here, whether it's not having the right resources just in terms of people, but also if you're not investing in the right innovations or the right processes or the right tools or whatever that may be, that's obviously setting you up for some sort of failure or blind spots. So having that alignment really from top to bottom, horizontally and vertically for your strategy and connected, that's obviously like one of the key things that we're doing here at Cascade, and that we're probably, between Laura and myself, we're preaching every day with our customers. It's one of the key elements to really connect strategy from the boardroom all the way to the individual and make sure everybody plays a role in it. But let's talk a little bit more like what you can do about it, because there are some more frameworks and things around that, especially that prioritization framework. Laura, what would you say about that?
I think misalignment's an interesting one, because I would say, even if I was to ask my friends who work in lots of different size organizations, do you feel misaligned, or do you think you have a misalignment problem? I don't think people generally feel that. And it's interesting because you would think when you work for a large organization, I'm talking a global, global 20,000 people plus organization, which is some of the organizations that I work with day to day. I don't think they feel like they have a misalignment problem. But I think what I've really seen work very effectively is actually just very simply giving many people in the organization, certainly leaders and their peer, their people in their team and maybe a level below, giving them visibility into where the company wants to head in the next 3 to 5 years, or 1 to 3 years, depending on the strategy. By giving visibility into that, first and foremost, actually brings an element of, oh, I didn't realize this is what we wanted to do as a business. Now I know the importance of my strategies, or, oh, I didn't consider the impact that this could make. And I think that's a really simple, sort of underrated tactic, I think, that we can use. I think also, secondly, misalignment often comes from being very operational or very tactical rather than thinking more strategically. And I think that subtle change in mindset can be very powerful, because all of a sudden you're elevating people from just thinking tactical day to day to thinking bigger picture, longer term. What does it mean for the business and the core metrics? And that's something that I've seen organizations have evolved, not overnight, but certainly over a period of months and years, is really elevating people to think just that little bit more strategically and connecting the work that they're working on more closely with the organization. And there's a few ways you can do that. One being, orienting everybody's strategic plans around key themes or key focus areas, and only making them focus on those things. I think the second one is obviously involvement, and getting as many people involved in the creation of the strategy so they feel a part of it, although that also brings obviously some nuanced challenges. And then I think, again, aligning around or giving visibility in the right platforms and tools that you can actually show what those plans are going to look like, and share with the business where the company is heading. What are your thoughts on that, Miriam? What have you seen work?
Yeah, I also think it's oftentimes, I think there is a bit of a symptom of like the thought of process about it's hard to think strategically, and not everybody needs to think strategically in the organization. And I don't disagree with that. Not everybody does need to think strategically all the time, but they need to understand what strategy is and how they're contributing to it. And I think the hardest part for teams oftentimes is to really break down those bigger objectives into those bite-sized items, and whether it's those actions and milestones and checklists and whatever that is that they can really look at and work on every week or every month, like, and not just like, oh, this is happening throughout the year. That is like way too far, and like you can't really kind of break it down to make it a day-to-day action. So breaking it down, I think that is always the key, in my opinion, to success and to really involve everybody on the right level. And with that comes automatically alignment as well, and a broader understanding of how teams are involved in the strategy.
I think as well, something that we maybe haven't touched on yet, but I know we plan to talk about it a little bit, is I think there's the element of involving people, but there's also just the very simple mechanism of communicating. I think we had a discussion the other day where we were like, we don't have to wait until the plan is perfect to communicate it. Sometimes it's keeping people in the loop on the process, or communicating the general direction of where they're heading is kind of almost as important. I think I also definitely wanted to touch on prioritization frameworks, because I think this is really critical to, or I've seen it critical to the success of a lot of organizations. There's a few different ways you can go. I think my favorite personally is the framework where you sort of assess your goals on whether they are high impact and sort of low effort. I think, they're the things you should be tackling almost, have a list of them and really crank through them. I think when it comes to low impact, high effort, maybe that's where you start having a conversation about, is it worth the effort? What's it actually going to do to our metrics? Is it actually going to move the needle in our business, or are we just doing it for the sake of it? And then kind of the other buckets, like low impact, low effort. Again, it's low impact. Is that just something we sort of put on the back burner or put on the low priority list? Have you seen any of the frameworks maybe that work slightly differently, Miriam?
This is also kind of my favorite framework, and I've seen this working well. But even just sometimes with leadership teams, to get on a whiteboard and prioritize is a helpful exercise, and just to see where everybody's head is at. But even the prioritization framework that Laura just shared around like impact and effort, I would say, like, if you want to like do something right now to be clear about your priorities for Q2, do the impact effort analysis and understand where you stand. How can you still make the biggest impact in to close your Q2 strongly? I would say that's probably an easy enough thing to do and get you a result right away. Helps you prioritize and also helps you potentially delegate or put it lower in the priority list.
Yeah. And I think that leads nicely, actually, there's a great question around who should be involved in creating a strategy. And we do have Q&A at the end, but sometimes I think it's nice to capture these things live. But I think for me, it would be good to talk about who should be involved. And I know we're going to be talking a little bit about accountability in a moment, which I think sets it up nicely. But I think getting the balance right, like you said, of not having too many cooks in the kitchen, getting people involved in the right step. I think for me personally, and I'm curious to what you think, Miriam, I think where we've seen the most successful strategies are, if you think about the strategies in different tiers, you've kind of got the corporate and the group strategy, which is often led by the board and the senior leaders. And then you kind of have your business unit or functional strategies, which are typically driven by the heads of those departments with involvement and maybe informing it through their team. And then you kind of have departmental or more operational strategies, which are often the more tactical pieces rather than strategies, in my opinion. And that's often driven by the people doing the work. I think once you break it into those three elements, you can kind of pick who should be involved at the right step. The departmental strategy is arguably the hardest, because it's bigger groups of people. It's more cooks in the kitchen. It's more opinions. It's more tactical, less strategic. Typically people who are fairly new in their positions or maybe haven't had too much exposure to strategy. So that can be the most difficult piece to really elevate, I think. But often the corporate or group strategy is the one that's typically the most well thought out and the most strategic, but is often the least communicated down. So I don't know, it doesn't really answer the question, but I'm curious if you've got any opinions.
Yeah, I would say in terms of involvement and around the strategy creation, especially if we're starting from the top, I would always say it should involve a diverse team, but also the team that actually can make a call about things. I think there are always the elements that need to be aligned on in a leadership team, and that are usually the focus areas or strategic pillars or whatever you call it in your business, alongside with some key KPIs you would want to see. And I think everything beyond that can already be delegated. I don't think you want to tell your people, I would actually recommend to never tell your people how to do anything, but rather ensure and empower then the teams on like maybe one level down to come up with like, how are you going to achieve focus area XYZ? How are you going to achieve the KPI? And then you can break it down further and further throughout the org structure. But having this really clear direction is key. It's so much key. I've seen this like in all different shapes and forms, and it has to be super simple and super clear, but also really strong and somewhat probably a little bit uncomfortable, obviously, to get people excited. And what I've seen working well as well, especially if you're creating the strategy on that level a little bit higher, is to invite in diverse perspectives. I've seen this working really well, especially since maybe if you're always asking your head of marketing to help with thinking about the marketing elements, they're always going to come up with the same elements. But if you might ask maybe, I don't know, your head of digital or whatever to maybe think a little bit different about it too. So get your team to think a bit differently. I find that I've seen that working really well. It disrupts a little bit the process, but it also creates a spark. So maybe something to think about. But let's continue to the next one of accountability. So we still have a couple to get through here. So the next element is lack of accountability. So what does that look like? We're now really talking, you have created your strategy and you have probably some projects out there and probably some KPIs, and they're just free floating potentially. And there's like a lack of ownership of projects or KPIs. So it's great if you define it, but if it doesn't have an owner, it's obviously not going to happen. But unfortunately, I do see that quite a bit. It's out there, but it doesn't have an owner. It doesn't have a timeline. The same holds true if there are too many KPIs or too detailed KPIs. Sometimes teams or organizations want to measure everything. So that is obviously critical as well to really make that distinction about like, what are your primary, what are your secondary KPIs, what are you really focusing on, and what is potentially more of a supportive KPI. And if there are even co-owners, like I know that sometimes teams want to be like, oh, but this person also has to be involved and this person has to also own it. Co-ownership is rarely working well for a longer period of time. Like even in Cascade, in our platform, we always have, there has to be a single owner. You can have collaborators, you can have other teams to work with and to pull in information, but there has to be a single owner. And I've definitely subscribed to that one. But Laura, what have you seen as well around accountability and how to foster that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of things. I actually was having this exact conversation with an organization today, which was, well, we don't have a single owner. You know, there's quite a few people involved, and I was like, I had to really challenge it because you need to have a single owner who's really driving for the success. Although there are other people involved in collaborating and probably even to equal weighting, you have to have somebody really driving it and really responsible. I think on the KPIs, my favorite way to talk about it, and I think everybody knows what a KPI is. Everybody knows what a metric or a measure or a target is, but a lot of people don't understand the gravity or the weighting of them. And so I always like to talk about them in being primary and secondary. Primary are the things that we absolutely need to measure and get right for our organization to survive, profit, revenue, those kind of things. And then secondary KPIs are like the everything else that we might measure to either get an indication we're on the right track. So, you know, looking at kind of leading indicators, or the other KPIs that we also still need to measure, but when we're in a very important meeting, we're not really talking about them. We're really talking about the primary ones. And I think even just having a bit of understanding of what they are for your team or your department or your organization can help then clear a little bit of that noise and help people to make sure that their strategies are really focused on the primary ones. And I think finally, this bit is like the hardest, but I think fostering kind of regular updates to the strategy or regular reviewing of the progress. It doesn't have to be changing the strategy. I think there was a comment a moment ago, like, you shouldn't be changing or redoing your strategy too often, but you certainly should be challenging if it's in the right direction, and certainly bringing in external factors, competitive pressure, market conditions, bringing in all of that to make sure that you're heading in the right way. And I liken it to habits. Like, I've got a coach for my nutrition and my health. And at first it was super, super awkward. I had to do my updates. I had to talk about my progress. And it was awkward because I wasn't doing the right things. I wasn't jumping on the scale. I wasn't eating the right things, and it was horrible. But then I started creating the habits, and I started seeing the progress and the results. And after a couple of weeks or a couple of months, those habits just become a ritual. I'm seeing the progress. It's making me feel good. And it's, I've already got that sort of discipline in place. And it's the same for strategy. It's kind of cliche, but it is the same of like fostering that culture of let's talk about it. It's going to be awkward, but we have to talk about it in order to get the results.
Yeah. So true. It's I think it's uncomfortable in the beginning, and change is always uncomfortable, but really like pushing for that regular update cadence is very, very critical. Even if people are dreading it in the beginning, eventually they'll thank you.
Yeah.
All right. So the next one is about ineffective communication. And what does that look like? So usually in effective communication, we see symptoms like isolated decision-making, or even if anything new is being introduced, there is a resistance to the change that's coming from teams because they don't feel well informed. Even in general, it can lead to a lower morale. I've seen that as well. If there is a lack of communication, teams just feel like, oh, there is something going on. They start to speculate, but they don't really know what it is. And it just feels uncomfortable if you're in the unknown. And of course, not everything has to be shared, but yeah, we had already talked about that earlier a little bit. Just this element of sharing often, and even if it's just communicating the process, is so much more effective to keep people engaged and to also ensure like your teams understand what's going on and there is openness to change, especially if you're introducing something new. Or I also always say any strategic project or strategic process as you're rolling out your strategy, it's usually some sort of a change process that you're introducing to the organization because you want them to do something different again. Maybe there are some new behaviors attached to it. Maybe you're introducing a new monthly meeting cadence or weekly meeting cadence. So it's some sort of a change project. So you need to communicate often. That's in my opinion, like if as a leader you think you're over communicating, you're probably just communicating enough, I would say. Yeah. But Laura, what do you have to add to this one?
I think picking like a method and sticking to it for the communication style, just kind of so that people know what to expect, especially if it's, we move more to remote world, where are people expecting to get the latest communication? Is it Teams? Is it email? Is it the town hall meeting? And sort of sticking to that. I think fostering almost that feedback culture. I think we've also discussed kind of the things that have worked for us in organizations, the coffee chats, the ask me anything, the fireside chats with founders, places where you give a space for people to be part of the kind of strategic decision making, but also listening and allowing space and allowing people to be part of that is something that can go a long way as well.
Yeah, 100%. Talking through it and allowing this and creating that space, because like we know, like culture eats strategy for breakfast. So you want to take care of that culture.
Definitely.
And then the last element of our 5 elements here, over-reliance on assumptions. So what does that look like? So it's usually a lack of insights in a certain way. Maybe you have a bunch of data, but you're lacking the right insights. You're lacking the right combination of what actually is the data telling you. Or you have any invalid assumptions that sometimes it's, if even organizations are around for a longer time, it's like, they make decisions based on the assumptions or what has always worked in terms of, oh, but we always bought the green t-shirt because green is the color of the season or whatever it is. Something like that. Like, are insights considered? Like maybe it's not what always worked. Maybe things change and we know that consumer behavior changes. or just in general, again, like slow decision making. Slow decision making is usually if there is too many assumptions and there is maybe not enough insights, and teams just lack that right information to make those strong and fast and well-informed decisions. So what can we do about that? Again, like getting these really high quality insights is obviously a starting point, but there's also a lot around what you can do regarding meetings. Laura, do you want to talk about that a little bit more?
Yeah, I think this is something I talk about quite often with organizations. Is I think most businesses have a good strategic cadence, or have at least some regular reporting insights that they do. But are they really having the most efficient and outcome-driven meetings? Are they making the right decisions with the right people in the room, with the right data in front of them? What does their data maturity look like? And so some of the things that we really drive and push organizations to do is really take a step back, understand the lay of the land, where that information needs to be the strongest and where the data is coming from, then getting that right, but also factoring in when are the key decisions and key progress updates needed, who needs to see them, what does the report look like, and then lay it on top of that. What are the meetings and opportunities to actually discuss those reports and data in order to then increase that decision making? So that would be my recommendation personally. I think on the last bootcamp that we did, we talked about a bit of a toolkit that we had for driving quite effectiveness for that. But if I could leave you with one thing that you could do today, it could be really understanding, do the teams understand why we need the data? Are we getting the right data at the right cadence? And then are we presenting it? And then do we have the right audience too? So there's a few little caveats to kind of get in line, I would say.
Yeah, totally. And I think the only thing I would add is about these outcome-focused meetings, and whether it's outcome-focused meetings or also sometimes reporting, right? Like I remember even from my time, I had to create so much reporting oftentimes, and you don't even know how it's being used. Like, what's the outcome of the reporting? What is being decided upon? Especially if you're like, I always try to see it from both sides. Like, if I'm the receiver, what am I doing about it? How am I making better decisions with the reporting and with the insights, or in a meeting? How are we utilizing it to move things forward? But if you ask your teams to input and to provide updates, you obviously also want to make sure that they know why they're doing it, because they might spend a lot of time on it. So it's really important to really think about like the why of the meeting, the report, or whatever it is, because nobody wants to waste people's time. So let's just to be effective, but also outcome focused. I would always say that's the key for driving speed in the organization here. Okay, so I think that sums up our 5 elements: lack of accountability, misalignment, ineffective communication, lack of focus, and over-reliance on assumptions. So if we're imagining we were in a perfect world, what would we want to have to perfectly execute our strategy and not have any blind spots? We would always want to have full-on accountability, alignment, visibility, focus, and act with speed in the organization.
I'd love to kind of ask the audience as well, kind of maybe, or from what you've heard today, what is the one thing or that either you wish or you will go and implement in order to drive that accountability and visibility or focus in your organization? Drop it in the chat if you've had any ideas today that you're bursting to implement.
I love that. Perfect. So now we're going to move into the second part of the presentation to give you some more practical tools as well, and looking at ways how to identify your strategy's blind spots. So we'll start with a couple of elements here. So the first one, and we talked about that already a little bit throughout the presentation, is invite in different perspectives. And whatever that may look like for you, whether it's in your team, maybe you bring in some cross-functional team members, or maybe in your leadership team, as you're creating your strategy, you get an outside perspective or an advisor. That is essentially Laura and my role here at Cascade. We're that outside voice or that outside advisor to provide a different perspective, or also just ask the right questions. Sometimes you just need somebody to ask different questions to get a different perspective. And to even maybe change your own perspective. Get somebody who asks you the right questions. Or even if it is one of those feedback rounds that you do with a group of employees, or whether it's in person or online through a bit of a question tool. So there are options to just get different perspectives and help you source what's going on in your organization, what you might not see. And the second element, having regular reflection meetings, especially if you are in a leadership position or you're leading a team or you're heading up an organization, it is so, so important to really take that time and step out of that day-to-day, which we're usually getting pulled in anyways, because ultimately we're all hardwired. Even if you're calling yourself a strategist or you're the CEO, whatever you are, we're all hardwired ultimately to really think about the next step first and what's in front of us. That's just how human brains work and how we get some sort of satisfaction, I guess, as well, as we're ticking some boxes. But stepping out and taking that time in whatever way that is, whether it's for you as an individual, if you're the leader of an organization and you have your own rituals to step out and invite in new creative perspectives, or just also bring your team together on a regular basis and step out, have those regular reflection meetings, have somebody help you facilitate it, and really take that bird's eye view from time to time. It's so important. And I always see it's getting sometimes pushed away, oh yeah, this is so hard to think strategically now. We have more important things to do. You don't. You have to take that time, because again, maybe you're overseeing a blind spot, or maybe there's something going on that you're just not seeing as you're in the day-to-day in the tunnel vision. And then very exciting, we have a tool that we're going to present very shortly now to assess your strategy. And that is really something you can essentially do today to step away and understand where you stand with your strategy. But I'll hand it back over to Laura to walk you through that.
Thank you. So as Miriam mentioned, we do have a number of strategy tools. My favorite is the strategy maturity assessment. I'm going to walk you through it very, very briefly now, probably a 1-minute stop tour. But on the next slide, we do have, I think, a QR code, which you can either scan with your phone now, or we will, I can see it popped up already. We've dropped the link in there if you're on your computer. What really this is going to do, it takes roughly 10 minutes. It really helps you to anchor, take a step back, understand whether you have the right vision in place, whether you have the right resources, whether you feel like you have a good roadmap and operating cadence in place that helps you to actually drive your organization forward. On the next slide, we've got a brief video of where you can find it, I believe, or what it looks like. So this is what the report looks like. You'll see that it's based around kind of governance structure. It gives you this spider web around your results at the end of it, which you are welcome to then utilize and share with your team members. You'll see at the bottom, we've scored it in a number of areas, from terminology, how easy it is to translate the strategy, your vision and your values, your governance, your culture, your communication style, how aligned you feel. So it's really quite comprehensive. Miriam, if you let me do the screen share, I am going to just show a very quick tour of what this looks like. So give me one moment. You should be seeing that in a second. So when you're on the QR code, or when you've accessed the link, this is what it looks like. Pop in your email so you can get the assessment afterwards. And then it will take you through a series of questions. So are you using any frameworks? Maybe you've implemented OKRs or Hoshin Camry. Do you feel like they seamlessly connect and it's really well understood by your business? Maybe not, maybe partially, maybe full. And so you can see that there's kind of a series of numbers. Once you do this, it will then output that spider diagram, that report element for you. And you can, if you wish, you can have anyone in your organization complete this if you want to get a diverse range of perspectives as well. So hopefully that's useful. Feel free to check out that tool, kind of assess your business and how you're trending towards finding your blind spots. What I'm going to do next, we're going to take a little bit of an ad break, if you want to call it that. As you know, this session is sponsored by Cascade. We are the #1 strategy execution platform in the world. And we're going to have Beck come to the stage if you are ready, Beck. And she is going to give us a very quick tour of who we are. So feel free to join us, Beck. Over to you. I think she's coming on stage now. Here you are. Hi, Beck. Welcome.
Right. Thank you, guys. Quick heads up, we're going to have a couple of minutes at the end here for Q&A as well, and that will be over this little segment as well as everything that Laura and Miriam have just covered. So definitely stick around for that. You can start popping questions in the chat now. But really quickly, my name is Beck, and I'm here to help you transform the way that you do strategy. So chances are that you are here because you've got a couple of blind spots in your strategy. If you're here today, you probably are not quite sure what's going on in every corner of your business, and probably your strategy might live in one of these two. You know the feeling with these ones. The spreadsheets are just overflowing, the slides are scattered everywhere, tabs are multiplying faster than you can even keep up with what's going on. But trust me, you would not be the first ones to struggle with this. Lucky for you all, you have just stumbled across the only solution you will ever need for this. Cascade is going to centralize your strategy under one roof, enable accelerated decision-making and streamlined efficiency, so you will know exactly what's going on with your strategy. So picture this: no more slow decision-making, no more working in silos, and no more wasted time. Cascade is going to help you execute your strategy faster than ever by enabling your team to plan, execute, and track everything in one single easy-to-use platform. Here's how Cascade is going to change the way you approach strategy for good. First, you'll be accelerating your decision-making by centralizing your tech stack under one single roof. See all of your key metrics and present them on sleek reports that are created in just a few clicks. No more time wasted getting those end-of-the-month figures together. Cascade makes those reports for you with no need to update them. Choose what you want to report on and easily share it with whoever needs to see it. Next, you'll be breaking down those silos and making visibility the word of the year. We all know that teams operating in silos duplicate work and often put time into projects that are not aligned with your organization's strategy. Cascade will change that with a state-of-the-art planner. You can see what everyone is working on and how that is impacting your overarching strategy. Finally, align your team like never before and make them focus in on what really matters. With Cascade's alignment map, you can see what initiatives are aligned across your whole organization. You can give those projects purpose and discard whatever work is being done that doesn't have an effective impact on your ultimate goals. Do you want to transform your strategy forever? I know you do. Book a quick call with us and you'll see how Cascade will transform your current strategy situation into the lean, mean efficiency machine you have always dreamt of. You want to hear the craziest part? Customers like Mercedes, Carhartt, and Bosch said that Cascade has improved their bottom line in less than 12 months. So go ahead and bring us those strategy assessment results, book that call, and bring transparency, alignment, and fast decision-making to your team today. With that covered, we will open it up now to a few minutes of Q&A. You can feel free to ask anything about Cascade or anything from Laura and Miriam about the session earlier.
Thank you so much, Beck. Well, I think we answered quite a few of the questions. Let's see if we have any new ones come in. Any that you want to cover, Miriam?
Yeah, I think we did cover lots of those already, but yeah, just looking for some more questions.
I don't know if you have a framework for scenario planning that you can recommend. I did see that come up before. You have one top of mind?
Yeah, I have never really used a framework in that sense because it's mostly also a financial exercise that you're doing with scenario planning more so. That's what I would say. It's usually a bit more of a financial exercise that is being done there in a very structured way where you can just play usually with a couple of variables to ensure what you want to put in. You have to have your assumptions and then you have to really detail it out. But it's a very financial exercise in many ways as well.
Yeah. There's a question here, a new question around how you differentiate company strategy from product strategy, if at all. I don't know if you have any experiences from your time working at more product-led companies, but I think my opinion would be the company strategy. Well, it depends. If the two of them are kind of feeling a little bit combined at the moment, you could also take the balanced scorecard approach where you make sure that your company strategy has 4 different lenses of being financial, being customer driven, being internally focused, and kind of picking the 4 balances that you want to get your strategy. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I think it does depend a little bit on the organization, but if like a product is, oftentimes the product is a very much a leading element of how the strategy or how the organization works, because it's at the core of everything that happens. I do see differentiations though, because the company strategy would also be all encompassing more so around like maybe where you want to operate, how you want to operate. So it is like just a little bit bigger versus the product strategy is focusing a lot more on the specific consumer, on the product, on the innovation elements. So it's a fine line, I would say. And I think depending on the organization, the product strategy is probably dominating a lot of your actual strategy. But then there's also how do you distribute it, right? Like what are the channels? So there are more things usually to it that are more encompassing of the overall company strategy. I hope that answers the question.
There's a great question here. Well, I say it's great because it's directly aligned to what we do every day, which is, do you provide training for strategy execution? And can I share the webinar with my partners? Yes, I believe the session is recorded and you can send that to whoever, I think, but we'll have the marketing team confirm. For the training element, we do, as part of our platform and services, we do wrap in strategy execution training, if you like. We typically lead workshops as part of the journey with Cascade. So myself or Miriam would come into your teams and your business, and we figure out where you need help, and then we run the tailored workshops accordingly. So that's what we tend to do. And then we also complement that with elevating leaders and teams on how to do strategy execution well. We have a framework that we sort of follow and drive people in through culture or alignment or terminology, whatever that might look like for you. And it all starts with that maturity assessment so we can get a good idea of where you may need the most help. What about, how are we doing for time? There's a question around, I know what the outcome should be. How do I convert that into strategy? What are your thoughts, Miriam?
I think that's a great question. And it really hits on what is probably most important to start with, because you know what the outcome is. And I think that's oftentimes where I see, like, I think I see your founder. So where founders potentially struggle with a little bit more, like you really know like what you want and what the outcome is supposed to be, is probably somewhat visionary as well. But then breaking that down into the how is probably not, is oftentimes I see that it's not so easy, but that's where you need to bring in some help to help you break it down, because you might not need to know that how, and your strategy really is how are you actually achieving that outcome ultimately, with what is what that you're focusing on, what are the objectives that you want to like associate to those focus areas with clear KPIs, and how do you break that even further down to projects and actions and associate and delegate it to the right owners. So yeah, it's what can I say? It's a process, I would say. Take the time and invite in more people to help you break down what you have in your mind right now, because I think it's you don't have to do that on your own.
Yeah,
it helps. What do you have anything to add, Laura?
No, I think that was covered. I think, what was I going to say? There's a great question, sorry, around like in the integration of different projects, programs, OKRs, and KPIs. And I can see the huge organization that you're from, and you probably have fallen into the trap of different teams running different terminology, different strategy approaches, frameworks, and all of that. So we are framework agnostic, if that's the right phrase, where we can actually integrate all of that different terminology into the platform. I've personally worked with an organization who had balanced scorecard, OKRs, major change programs, KPIs, measures, targets. They had all of these different terminologies, and we put it into the platform in order to serve the need of the different teams. So it's just about understanding who needs to see what, and kind of enabling that functionality, but also that then allows you to still report at a central place, but knowing that the teams can adopt the frameworks and terminologies that they use. So hopefully that answers your question. I think maybe last question, because the last couple are kind of similar. To what extent is our approach tailored to meet the unique challenges and opportunities? Miriam, I don't know if you want to talk about, I know you work with a lot of very different industries and organizations at different maturities. How, to what extent has your approach been tailored?
Yeah, I would always say we meet our customers where they're at in their strategy process, and help you to get to where you want to get to as well. Like, we are definitely sitting down in the beginning and getting really clear about like what's the outcome that you want to achieve, and what does success look like for you in this process. But we're tailoring our approach in the sense of that we're definitely meeting you where you're at, but then we also have a proven approach that we know helps organizations to be successful in their strategy. So I would say there's probably 80% of, we know this is the proven path, and we're tailoring it again, like to where you're at, if that helps. Okay. Do we have any other questions, or is that it?
I think we are at time now. There was a very last thing, which was any book recommendations on strategy. I personally recommend Strategy Safari and anything by Simon Sinek. Miriam, I don't know if you have any suggestions.
No, I mean, we talked about it recently, and I think we both like what you just mentioned. Definitely love Simon Sinek.
Perfect. Well, I know we didn't get to all of the questions. I think there are a few last ones, but hopefully you found that session valuable. Really good to see everybody here. And look out for the resources, the recordings. Thank you so much for your attention. Any final words, Miriam?
Thank you, everybody, for joining, and hopefully we'll see you all soon.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a great day, everybody.
Bye, Miriam.
Bye. Bye, Laura.